He didn't take her crown. He didn't touch the title. He reached past everything ornamental in her life and removed one small thing almost nobody outside Britain has heard of. And that is exactly why it was devastating. Then his sister said 7 words, and according to this report, nobody in that room spoke for almost a full minute. Here's what's being claimed. A private meeting at Buckingham Palace, spring 2026. 5 people in the room: the King, the Queen, the Princess Royal, 2 unnamed members of the household, and a solicitor from the office of the Keeper of the Privy Purse. The stated business was routine, a review of patronages ahead of the King's reduced schedule. He's been in cancer treatment for 2 years. The institution has been quietly reorganizing around that fact the entire time. What the report says happened instead is that Charles opened by reading from a prepared document, and the document removed Camilla's presidency of the Royal Osteoporosis Society. I know exactly how that lands. It sounds like a footnote, it sounds like nothing. Stay with me, because within this family, it might be the most precisely aimed thing Charles has ever done. Camilla's connection to that charity isn't ceremonial, and it isn't decorative. Her mother, Rosalind Shand, died in 1994 after years with osteoporosis. Her grandmother died of the same disease. Camilla has spoken publicly about watching her mother's spine compress, about the pain, about a medical establishment that in the early 90s barely conceded the condition existed. She became patron in 1997, president in 2001. Of every appointment she accumulated across 2 decades of the most patient reputation rehabilitation in modern British history, that is the only one she earned rather than married into. She has said, in her own words, that it is the cause closest to her heart. According to this report, that is the one Charles took from her. Not the Queen Consort title, not the household funding, not the Order of the Garter he personally gave her in 2022. Any of those would have detonated across every front page in Europe for a month. He took the charity. Now sit with the arithmetic of that choice, because it splits 2 ways and both are chilling. Either Charles selected the option causing the least public damage to his wife, a protective act wearing the costume of an attack, or he selected the single thing that would wound her most while leaving her nothing to say about it publicly. Because how does she object? How does the Queen tell a country that she is devastated over losing the presidency of an osteoporosis charity to the Princess of Wales? She can't. There is no version of that complaint that doesn't make her look small, which is, if it was deliberate, the most Charles thing imaginable. Never a confrontation, a maneuver, damage delivered so quietly and so exactly that the person bleeding cannot describe the wound without sounding petty. I'm not saying that's what he did. I'm saying if you have watched this man for 50 years, you already know he is capable of it. But the patronage isn't the reason this story broke. The report says the document didn't leave the role vacant. It named Catherine, and the Princess of Wales, according to this account, was not in the room, had not been consulted. The arrangement had been discussed between the King and the Prince of Wales some weeks earlier and finalized without Camilla being told. That's the hinge, that's the thing that turns a footnote into a scene. Because Camilla didn't react to losing a charity. She reacted to discovering that her husband and her stepson had made a decision about her life, together, and that she was the last person in the palace to hear about it. What the report describes next is unusually detailed. I want to flag that, because the level of granularity here, who looked where, who said what, could only have come from someone in that room briefing a journalist immediately afterwards. Weigh it accordingly. It says she didn't raise her voice. It says she asked exactly one question. She asked whether William had requested it, and it says Charles did not answer. In that silence, according to the report, she understood the entire shape of the thing, that her husband hadn't consulted her, that her stepson had, that the position she'd spent 30 years constructing had just been revealed as conditional, and that the condition was Charles staying alive. She stood, gathered her papers, didn't look at Anne, didn't look at the solicitor, said only that she assumed the announcement had already been drafted. Nobody contradicted her. Which brings us to Princess Anne. If you don't understand what Anne is inside this institution, none of this lands properly. She is not a personality. By the court circular's own published figures, she has been the hardest working royal for most of 4 decades, routinely over 500 engagements a year, more than her brothers, more than her nephews, more than anyone. She does not give interviews, she does not brief the press. In 50 years of public life, she has never publicly said an unkind word about Camilla, or Diana, or Meghan, or anyone at all. And here's what most people have forgotten. Anne was romantically involved with Andrew Parker Bowles before he married Camilla. She attended their wedding in 1973. She has been standing at the center of this story since before Diana was engaged, since before William existed. Anne does not take sides, that is her entire function. It is the only source of her authority, and she has protected it for half a century. So when a report claims she spoke as Camilla reached the door, and that what she said was one sentence, and that she said it to Charles rather than to Camilla, that is not a minor detail. That's a claim that the only genuinely neutral figure in the House of Windsor stopped being neutral. According to the report, Anne said, "You should have told her yourself." 7 words, read them again. She isn't defending Camilla, she doesn't say the decision was wrong, she doesn't say Catherine shouldn't have it, she doesn't object to a single element of the outcome. She's telling her brother he was a coward about it, that he sat in a room with his wife of 20 years and let a solicitor deliver the news, that he let his son make the decision and then declined to own it. That in 2026 he did precisely what he did in 1993 and precisely what he did in 2018, the one maneuver Charles has performed his whole life, which is to avoid the conversation and let the consequences arrive later, carried by someone else. The report says Charles didn't respond, closed the document, thanked the staff, ended the meeting, and Anne walked out without speaking to anybody. So what do we actually have? A report with no named sources, no confirmed attendees, no palace comment, and a line of dialogue supposedly delivered to a monarch by his sister in front of 2 members of staff. That's thin, I'm not going to dress it up. But separate the scene from the scaffolding, because the scaffolding is entirely a matter of record. Camilla's presidency of that charity is real, and it is exactly as personal as I've described. Anne's engagement figures are published annually, and they are exactly as dominant. A relationship with Andrew Parker Bowles is documented, and Charles's conflict avoidance is described in nearly identical language by his own son in a published memoir, by his biographers, and by essentially everyone who has ever worked for him. Every structural fact underneath this account checks out. Only the scene is unconfirmed, which is precisely what makes it worth taking seriously rather than laughing off. The scene is exactly what these specific people would do. Camilla has spent her adult life outmaneuvering people who underestimated her. She survived the tapes, she survived Diana, she survived a public that spent 20 consecutive years telling pollsters they did not want her crowned, and then watched her get crowned anyway. She won every one of those fights. She won them because Charles always chose her. If this report is accurate, the equation that made all of it possible has finally inverted, not because he stopped loving her, because he started dying. And a dying king begins, eventually, to think about what he is handing his son. Anne understood that. It's why she spoke. Not to rescue Camilla, to force her brother to look directly at what he was doing, instead of sliding away from it the way he has slid away from every difficult thing he has ever faced. He didn't look. He closed the document. She hasn't appeared publicly since, according to the report. She's been at Ray Mill House, the Wiltshire estate she bought in 1996 with her divorce settlement from Andrew Parker Bowles, for £850,000. And earlier this year, a separate report claimed she had already transferred that house into the names of her 2 children, before this meeting ever happened. Which tells you something. That is not a woman who has been defeated. That is a woman who read the board, counted the moves she had left, and started moving assets while everybody else was still watching the King's Diary. She lost a charity. She lost her husband's protection. She lost the last comfortable illusion that any of it was ever permanent. She isn't finished. She's counting. And there's a final detail that I keep returning to, because it may be the saddest thing in this entire account. Camilla has 2 children. Tom Parker Bowles and Laura Lopes. Neither has ever worked for the royal family in any capacity. Neither carries a title. Both grew up inside the whole of this, the affair, the tapes, the divorce, the wedding, the coronation. In December 2025, according to reporting at the time, Camilla personally telephoned her son and asked him to come to Sandringham for Christmas. She told him she hadn't spent Christmas with him in a long time. He said no. He said neither he nor his sister would be coming, and that from now on, it would be every other year. He spent that Christmas on a sofa at his ex-wife's house. The Queen of England asked her son to come home for Christmas, and he chose a sofa. Her children can feel what's arriving. They've watched their aunt removed from a payroll without a phone call. They know exactly what a spreadsheet can do. They're not waiting to find out what happens to people standing too close to Camilla when the reign changes hands. They've already stepped back. If you're new here, hit subscribe, because everything that happens next depends on a single question nobody outside that palace can answer. How long does Charles have?